Good evening and welcome to tonight's event hosted by the Isle of Man Business Network, the COVID recovery. Does the Isle of Man need to reinvent itself for a global audience? We're lucky enough to be joined tonight by Paul, Richard and Basil from the Manx Solidarity Fund. And just a reminder for tonight, if you have any questions, Slido is active with hashtag IOMBN to join us and ask any questions. So firstly, I'm going to pass over to Basil, who's going to give us an introduction to the Manx Solidarity Fund.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us all here today. March seems so far away from us. The Manx Solidarity Fund was set up just after the Isle of Man went into lockdown. It was the idea of three businessmen that got together, and of which Paul was one of them. And they identified that there was going to be a need to look after those people who fell outside anything that government did. The Solidarity Fund and the idea of it was formed, and it is an example of how government and private sector can really work together. The charity trust deed was drafted within a day. We got it to the Attorney General. We got a CSP was, our CSP was Peregrine Corporate Services, was appointed as an initial trustee. The Attorney General processed the application really quickly. We then moved on. We formed a Manx Solidarity Limited company, and we found trustees to be appointed as directors onto that company. That was done within a day as well. We then approached Barclays Bank. Barclays Bank got an account opened for us within 2 days, which is in this market, in the people in our sector really know that is phenomenal what they did for us. So we were up and running within a week of lockdown, basically. We had the charity going. The trustees were quite a diverse group of people from various sectors. We came together. We met on Zoom. Most of us had met for the first time on Zoom. We approached the Lieutenant Governor. He became our patron. He joined us on all our calls, and we set out a system of how we were going to run. Basically, what we did was we divided our roles up into 5 areas. We appointed Jennifer Houghton to run our fundraising team. We got Carol Glover to run our applications team. We got
Malcolmine
to run the marketing side, and then we had a processing team and a payments team, a distributions team, and that all got set up fairly quickly. Once that was up and running, we went out into and started advertising that we were there, and we raised funds. I think we raised almost 300,000 within the first 2 weeks. That went up to over $500,000. And then we started fundraising events. I think the most popular one that got everybody's attention was Christian Zwali's 19 marathons, which was a phenomenal effort. And the way the Manx public got behind him, I think, he raised over £100,000 on his own, and apart from 1 or 2 donations, most of those donations were from individuals. There were a number of small donations of £20, £10, and then going up to the bigger amount. There was one £19,000 that was donated to us. So the whole Manx public has got behind the Manx Solidarity Fund, and it's so encouraging to be part of it, that everybody in the Isle of Man can get together and work together. for the benefit of the people in the Isle of Man.
Excellent. So far, have you had much of an uptake in terms of applications for the fund?
It has been slower than we thought it had been. We have, to date, we've just had 112 today applications. We have paid out just over £120,000 so far, and that's to about 43% of the applicants that we've had. Our criteria is quite limited to those people, businesses or charities that have been affected by COVID-19. So we are particularly aimed at people who are in dire straits at the moment, and we are expecting that to grow. Yeah.
Is that because you see another wave of cases on the island, or?
I think initially the government stepped in, and the government has moved really swiftly with the Mirror scheme and the other schemes that they've got. And I think from that side, they picked up a lot of the people that were in difficulties right at the beginning. I think once that scheme ends, there could be issues, and as trustees, we see this more as a long-term, as a marathon rather than a sprint. It's not going to be a short-term thing.
And so far, have you had a fairly even split between individuals and corporates applying to you?
I think
has it been...
at this stage, it's about 31% of the applicants have been individuals. We've had about 15% of charities, and the rest are businesses.
Okay. What kind of businesses should apply for the Manx Solidarity Fund, and what do business owners need to consider when applying for funding?
I think the fund was set up to look after COVID and businesses that were struggling directly because of COVID. So if the businesses, any business can apply. There are no restrictions. It's widely worded, but it has to be because of the COVID. The fund is not there to provide working capital for new businesses or new ideas or that side at this stage. We are purely looking after people that are in difficulty.
Okay. Is that likely to change over time, potentially, if there are funds left within? Such as if, I don't know, a business wanted to apply for funding to invest in new business activities for equipment, for example, going forward to allow them to survive and
I think
grow.
If they can demonstrate that their survival was related to COVID, then we definitely look at it. Mm-hmm. But I think we have raised the funds on the basis, and people have donated to the charity on understanding that we'd be looking after people in difficulty. I don't think we are there to provide working capital for businesses going forward.
That's great. And is the charity still continuing to raise funds? Are you actively pushing for donations? And have you seen sort of a drop-off in funds, really, in fundraising over?
We've changed our marketing of the fund to raise more awareness that we are there to help people. There are still funds coming in. We got a large donation today, which is very positive. So people are still donating, but at this stage we are not pushing it.
Okay. And just another one on there, you mentioned that charities can apply for funding. Is this sort of a great need you've seen from charities with the drop-off in, I don't know, the hospice, people being able to go and give donations, etc.? Is that something you've seen much of?
I think one of the issues that we did identify with everybody going into lockdown, a lot of the charities who had shops or had other ways of raising money got into difficulty. And yes, the fund is there to help charities if they have been affected by the COVID. We have helped I think about 6 or 7 charities that needed the funds. But if we look, we've got accountants who are helping us assess all the charities. And we've had applications from charities who've got large reserves. And they have got funds, so we enter into dialogue with them and then work out if it's actually related to COVID.
Perfect. Well, thanks very much, Basil. That's been really, really useful for the Manx Solidarity Fund side of things. We're going to move today's discussion on and talk about a number of different issues on the Isle of Man going forward. We're going to have a couple of good discussions, hopefully, around tax policy and revenue generation on the island, the vision for the economy and diversity, and the role of agencies moving forward. So firstly, we're just going to move on to tax policy and revenue generation, which I think, Paul, leads probably more to your area of expertise, but do pitch in if there are any answers that you want to, guys. So the Isle of Man has been accused of authoritarian lockdown measures, but strong actions have been afforded to the island to give us a unique status of a clean zone. How can businesses sort of make the best benefit of that going forward? Is there anything where they can sort of look to develop, and what sort of policies do you think the government are going to introduce?
I think the island's put itself in a very good position with regards to the whole notion of it being a safe haven, to make itself attractive for businesses that want to ultimately, when the borders open, of course, relocate to the island, or individuals want to move here because of that status. I mean, it's something which probably has to happen relatively quickly. It's a great opportunity right now, because with the fact that we opened up the borders the fact that we closed the borders so quickly meant that reaction time has enabled a recovery, which has been very quick. So what we can do is we can, for those businesses, they get up and running a lot more quickly, and that's a message which we should get out to the wider sort of world, I suppose. But I think one of the things to think about, that in terms of tax policy, we need to probably make in my view, make some quite bold decisions with regards to the way that we raise taxes. And that doesn't necessarily, by the way, mean raising corporate taxes, but just in terms of we're under threat constantly from the European Union, from the OECD. Businesses that establish themselves here, their owners maybe in different countries, and their assets maybe in other countries, are being chipped away at constantly by other countries' general tax policies. And we've seen the evolution of business. I've got a fly here. The evolution of businesses growing as a result of other tax policies. Banking, insurance grew as a result of controlled foreign company rules in the UK, for example, and they've also, in part, some of those industries are declining because those rules have been changed. So those threats are things that we need to think about, and whether we need to develop other tax policies or hone what we've got. I mean, let's face it, our tax system has been around for between 100 and 200 years, and yet, you know, we're here, we're in a digital studio, we're all talking about digitization, yet we have frankly an archaic system at the moment. We should perhaps upgrade that and do what, for example, other countries have done. Estonia, for example, and Georgia, where they've embraced technology in the way that they charge taxes. And that might give us a USP, something which we often, you know, the island's been built on tax. We're wedded to the zero rate. We're kind of in a little bit of a cleft stick in terms of what we do. If we look to other ways of raising revenue, that might put us in a better position. That, in turn, will possibly attract more businesses. And all of this, it's a perfect opportunity right now with COVID there, and with the position we're in, to actually rethink these things.
And as part of this, obviously, with the borders remaining closed, and we've actually had a good question come through on the border side of things. So this is from one of our users. Aside from the tourism industry, do the ongoing border restrictions pose a serious economic threat to the island's economy?
I think to a degree, it depends on which business you're in, because of course a lot of businesses have discovered during this process that you can in fact work very remotely and very well. And in fact, you only have to read the sort of the tabloids, you're finding people moving out of the city wanting to actually sort of work and embrace home working. And so there are opportunities there to attract people to come and actually live here because of lifestyle reasons as well as our tax environment. And work remotely, provided we can provide the infrastructure, including comms, fibre and all that sort of thing, very quickly. So I certainly believe that is the case.
That's something you've found, Richard?
Yeah, I was chatting to the boss of a CSP, talking about the borders. I was chatting to the boss of a CSP on Saturday, whose company's experienced a significant drop in fee income this last quarter, well into six figures. He can't wait for the borders to open because he wants that sort of face-to-face client time. That's the way he does business. That's the way the client expects business to be done. Even given the ongoing pandemic. So I expect a lot of that kind of business development type of activity will start up again fairly quickly after the borders close, but it's undoubtedly having an effect outside of the tourism sector.
And is that something that people can actively address, though, while the borders are closed? Is there anything that
we've all adapted to Zoom, and I think I've got Skype and Microsoft Teams on the go as well. But I think ultimately, in the longer term, it's those businesses which are able to get in front of a client literally who are going to be most successful. There's only a limited amount you can do with Zoom. I know it's seen as a panacea. It is at the moment. But I think in the longer term, we need to have the ability to travel to, into those key markets where the business is going to be. Yeah.
I'm aware of a number of businesses that have key people that visit the island to do services, certain key services for businesses on the Isle of Man. And those people can't do that work at the moment. So the businesses have to make decisions on, do they move those key services to locations where those key people are? And so it's a balancing act that the government is in a really difficult position. We all laud the government for what they've done and how safe they've kept us. But there's a long-term impact for that's going to come along, and I don't envy them the decision of when that time is. And nobody's been in this situation before, and how do they get it right?
I think on a related point, undoubtedly in the short term, there's some positive PR benefits from being COVID-free. I think Guernsey got a lot of positive UK media coverage out of their COVID-free status, but it's not a long-term source of competitive advantage being COVID-free. It's too risky. You can't base your the success of your economic model on being COVID-free in the short, medium term, because it's likely that there's going to be cases arriving in the Isle of Man at some stage. Yeah.
Which is why, in some sense, we need something else. It's an interesting point that you raised there, Basil, about the idea of people coming to the Isle of Man and providing services. Because, of course, what we should be hopefully encouraging is those people to actually set up on the Isle of Man from an economic perspective, rather than those services being bought in from the outside. So it's something that I've certainly been very keen on, is to try and identify what those services are and then focus in on them to bring them over here.
So with borders looking likely to be closed until 2021 potentially, even with our air bridge with Guernsey opening up at the moment, and the possibility of more, depending on whether we see some more clear zones, what can Isle of Man businesses do, and how can they approach business development differently to ensure a healthy pipeline of new business on the island?
I think we're probably going to, up until that point, be left with technological solutions, and Zoom and getting out there. You're trying to, I suppose, target very specifically the types of customers, because everybody's in the same position at the moment. So you need to find somebody who wants to relocate to the Isle of Man. How do you find them? Well, you probably use sort of Google or something like that, Google Ads, to target them. And that's the only thing we've got open to us at the moment, really.
I mean, I would add, obviously, with my background, undertake a marketing audit of your organization. It's a great time, if you have the resource, to invest in your brand and to look at your marketing again. How you're promoting your product, which channels are you using, is your product and service actually meeting a need? It's a good time to sit back and look at your business and look at what you do and whether it's sustainable in the, certainly in the longer term.
I suppose what that also does, by looking at that, you look at the need for actually travelling and whether you actually need to travel to go and meet certain clients you'll have to meet because they expect it.
I think look at this, what we're doing tonight. We are in front of cameras. Normally we would be doing this function at the Claremont or somewhere locally. And I think businesses have adapted. We've used technology, we've embraced technology. Half of us didn't even know what Zoom or Teams or any of those were before. And if you look at the conferences that we used to travel around the world to, people are holding those conferences on the internet through Zoom, and we're adapting. And I think that's what businesses have to realize. The whole world is in the same pandemic, and it's those who adapt quickly and get out there and be positive about it and push forward. Those are the businesses that are going to survive.
So as the economy starts to repair itself going forward, is the focus still on the 4 key sectors that we have on the Isle of Man? Is that likely to continue, or do you think that we need to rethink and restructure and resell the Isle of Man on the global stage? Is there something we can do there?
I think it's an inevitability that we will be focusing on the 4 sectors right now, because, but I believe there's an awful lot of thought needs to go into the sort of the core structuring of our economy and what we're offering, purely because we spend an awful lot of time being challenged by other jurisdictions for what we actually are. And the internal economy, we're reliant upon employment to support government effectively in terms of taxes. And the zero rate of corporate tax, which those 2 things are in conflict in some respects. So we're going to have to you're going to have to work very hard on that.
I would say we're a destination for business. We're a destination for people who want to come on holiday. People who come for business, they choose the Isle of Man because we're familiar with the sort of UK culture. We're obviously close to the UK and Ireland and Europe. We offer a great quality of life. We're founded on sort of safety, low crime rate. We're secure. We have short commute times. We have a fantastic sort of natural beauty, natural environment, and a unique Manx culture. These things are common across every sector, as are more sort of business-focused parts of the environment, like our telecoms infrastructure. And of course, there's the tax environment, which is common to all as well. My preference is, and has been for a while, that I think perhaps a single entity should be responsible for marketing the destination. Now, at the moment, we have the 4 agencies, and I doubt that that situation is going to change, at least in the short to medium term. So, be that as it may, I think we need to look at investing more in extending the reach of the message of the Isle of Man, about what the Isle of Man can offer. We've undoubtedly been really good in recent years at niche marketing activity. Things like gaming, ship registration, registration of private jets, etc. But what the result of that niche communication has been is that there's sort of low overall awareness of what the Isle of Man has to offer. And that's obviously impacted on when we're trying to attract people here to live or to relocate a business, which may fall outside of the scope of these agencies. So assuming that the agency model is here to stay, then I think we need to look very seriously at investing in a single promotional campaign which promotes the single business environment, in which the three sort of agencies, business, finance, digital, can sort of buy into. If we don't get this sort of appropriate sort of mass media coverage, we're not communicating the benefits of what we can offer well enough, in my view.
I think the other point there as well, you have the four agencies. There is a lot, as you point out, there's a lot of commonality there. And so in some respects, having four separate sort of agencies doing their own thing, they should be coming together, I think, an awful lot more to look at some of those common points and use them, and then going to market. But I can't help feeling that we need to, and we're going to talk about it, we need to have a unified vision for all of this and the pulling all in the same direction. And I'm not convinced yet we've got that.
Yeah, definitely. I think we need to look at, we need a clearly communicated positioning for the island. That would predicate any sort of large-scale marketing activity.
And do you think off the back of COVID-19 now is the time to really be looking to do that? Given we're in a unique position where we are clear at the moment on the island, does that allow us the undertakings on that sort of venture?
I think there's a lot of businesses and people are actually sort of looking very closely at what they do. It's a perfect time to do this, and no time like the present. And also largely because other countries are also going to be doing the same thing. We have to position ourselves and do things now, because otherwise other countries will do the same thing. So we need to spend a lot of time doing them.
Liverpool's just submitted last week a 178-page document to Number 10 in terms of their particular programme for recovery and the plans for their regional economy in the short to medium term. And I know that the island's sort of in the process of delivering its own plan, but we shouldn't be shy of wanting to invest in that, because I think my experience in sort of the last 10 to 15 years is that we've sort of shied away from wanting to invest in promoting the island, and now is a great time because and for any other reason, ad revenues are probably going to be through the floor for the next 6 to 12 months. So it's a great time to consider doing it.
So I'll take that next question.
Yeah. So we've got a couple more questions that have come in onto slide 04 is here. So are we narrowing potential opportunities by focusing on 4 sectors, or is niching the best direction of travel to move away from the image of an offshore haven?
I think the answer to that is we should move away from the image of an offshore haven, no doubt. And obviously, to become a safe haven is a good transition. That's very, very topical right now. The difficulty, I think, internationally is we are always going to be seen as an offshore haven because of the way that our economy works. But as a direction of travel, I definitely think that's the way we should be going.
In the 60s, 70s, 80s, we actively promoted in the national newspapers in the UK the fact that we were a low tax jurisdiction, and we wanted to welcome new residents to take advantage of that, and we obviously pushed our tourism agenda at the same time. We know we had the resources then to do that. So is it any surprise that the legacy of that is that we're known as a tax haven and probably a seaside, as an outdated perception of us as a seaside resort, if you like?
Yeah. A few more questions that have come through here. Is there a danger of leaving startups, creatives that enrich our economy behind by pushing a unified single message, RE, broad business ops on the Isle of Man?
I would think it's the opposite. If we create an environment where the startups are welcomed in, and we all got that unified message that there is the environment where a startup can thrive, being it in any industry, it doesn't have to be a creative one, in any form. The island is there. We can work closely with government to create opportunities for those businesses. So I would think it's exactly the opposite.
And is there a time frame for getting the Manx Solidarity Fund funding out to those in need? Do you think the bulk applications may still be to come?
I think so. We haven't got a time frame. We'll be around for as long as we think is necessary. We, hopefully we have helped as many people as we can. So there, I do think that once the government initiatives end, that we are going to see more and more people struggling, and that's where hopefully we will be able to help them get back on their feet.
Yeah. So preparatory works for Brexit have continued despite COVID, yet the local government have redeployed resources to address the current crises at the moment. With the Isle of Man interests not being tabled by senior officials at Whitehall, does this leave the Isle of Man exposed to an outcome that suits the UK's position more than ours so?
It's probably inevitable that the outcome will probably suit the UK's position anyway. The question is whether we get carried along with that or we are forgotten is a vexed question. And who knows, whether we end up being used as a political football. And I suppose that comes down to what other pressures are brought to bear. Probably going back to the last question, or whether we're seen to be a tax haven and not very helpful in the global economy by some.
I mean, if there's any reassurance, I know that having been seconded to that to the external relations team for a period, there's some very capable people who fight our corner, who work in that team, and the dialogue with not only the UK government but other governments around the world is extensive. And on the back of that, obviously, Chief Minister's mentioned, obviously pre-pandemic, the trips he's had to make to London, and that's all part of the process of engaging with UK political figures, some well-known, some not so well-known at the moment. So, my experience of it is that I'm reassured that the team has been doing a good job. What the outcome will be, we're not sure, but I know that our interests are well represented at the at pretty senior levels in Westminster.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So I'm just going to bring you back a couple of steps. Actually, we were talking about sort of what the key focus is going forward, and the idea that we've sort of been branded historically. And is there a way that we can change that going forward? What do we need to do to actually sort of put a better message out for the Isle of Man that we're not just a tax haven?
Difficult question. How long have you got? I think in some respects, you might say it might not matter what we do. We might still be labelled as a tax haven. I mean, the tax haven comes down to the fact that we've got zero corporate tax, and that's fundamentally is what's not really liked. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff like secrecy and everything else like that. But
we still actively promote ourselves as a low-tax jurisdiction, and in some people's eyes, certainly the popular perception in UK media is that low-tax jurisdiction equals tax haven. They're not interested really in sort of tax cooperation agreements, etc. No. They equate low-tax jurisdiction with tax haven.
You only have to look at the reactions of Scotland, Wales, Denmark, France and Germany that they weren't going to actually support businesses that were owned from offshore. And in fact, indeed, Wales said they said, and they included the Isle of Man in the list, but not Jersey. So it's sometimes a little bit bizarre. But I think that label is going to be here for a long, long time. There are certainly things we can do to mitigate that, but that would involve changing quite a lot of our economic backbone, and that is not something you would do lightly.
Do you think that's something we should look to do potentially?
I think my view is yes. We should be certainly investigating the impact of some of the measures, because we should be looking at the Isle of Man in terms of what's good for it, rather than necessarily, and I think it's inevitable, looking at our constant threats. I mean, they're always there, and we have to navigate a way through that, rather than saying, well, what is our vision going to be, and what do we need to do to get there? And that's the difficulty we face. It's being threatened and trying to do something for us.
I'd agree with all that. I think we have a history of reinventing ourselves various periods during the ages. Obviously, in 1800s, 1900s, we were known as and we were a very successful tourism destination. And up until the First World War, I think we were nearly touching 1 million visitors a year. And then, during the 60s, brought in sort of low tax, and we got a new sort of raft of residents to the Isle of Man. We got into financial services in the early 70s with basic deposit banking. Financial services became more complex. We then started going out to the world and selling the Isle of Man message. We had a very clear idea of what we were, a sort of offshore financial centre, and we had a very clear positioning, and we invested in promoting that around the world in those markets where we felt offered the greatest potential. In the early 2000s, that evolved further into gaming, and again, we went around the world shaking hands, investing in our promotion, and we had appropriate regulation, and we became very successful. And perhaps the time is right now to sort of rethink it again and establish, well, what are we? I mean, we have established a position, if you like, for the last sort of 10 years, which is the Isle of Man is an international business centre. Now, I think the problem with that was, although I don't have inherent problem with it, we didn't really articulate it. We didn't really invest in articulating what it was and then sort of telling people, why they should do business with us. So perhaps we need to look at trying to define what the international business centre of the future looks like. And by doing that, we then sort of own the concept, if you like. We're not going to be Dubai, we're not going to be, Canary Wharf, we're not going to be Monaco, but let's invent our own sort of idea of what a successful, forward-looking economy is. It doesn't have to be necessarily skyscrapers, but we can. At the root of it could be that sort of the great quality of life we have, those short commute times. I've got a brother-in-law who commutes 2.5 hours each way to London from Oxfordshire every day, and for the privilege he has to pay £8,000 a year. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, those kind of individuals are perhaps the people we should be looking at attracting to the island.
Yeah, and now is the time to do it, whilst you say it might be short-lived, because we have this safe haven idea. People are looking at their lifestyles, and the Isle of Man is a great place to be. So we have an opportunity, I think, across the board, but it is immediate, and we need to kind of get on with that and getting the message out there. I still can't help to feel that we've still got a lot of core work to do on things like tax. And in some respects, to move away from that and focus on this. It's a hard transition, but I think the opportunity is fantastic.
Don't you think the way that we have adapted to the challenges that we've had over the last few years, especially the finance industry, and that has adapted, and we've grown and changed and brought out new products. And we're going to have to continue to do that. And the platform that the government has given us to do that has allowed us to grow and be safe. I think there are a lot of jurisdictions who buried their heads in the sands and didn't do anything about it, that are now struggling and are in a worse position than we are.
We've definitely been at the forefront of a great many things, thanks to government, because they've done a fantastic job.
It's the foresight of government. We often can be very negative about things they do, but they have provided us with a really good platform to move forward on.
Yeah, there are always these complaints about the fact that we're a second mover or a third mover, but actually I think the watching brief occasionally has stood us in very, very good stead to actually make the right decision at the right time.
It's quite a well-known sort of fact on the island that we struggle to entice individuals back to the island from university or from further afield when we do have a need for that sort of entry-level jobs. Is there something that we could be doing at the moment potentially to encourage the next generation to come and invest in this idea, really?
I mean, from my perspective, in my sort of trade, if you like, marketing, there's opportunity here, but fair to say probably not the diversity of opportunity to get in the UK simply because we're a much smaller place. So I would continue trying to attract new business here, different kinds of business. I think there's a lot of potential through trying to engage with creative industries, creative sector, digital media, getting them here. Because at the end of the day, in terms of marketing, there's a very narrow sort of strip of opportunity, if you like, for marketing careers in the island. Very different to other careers, admittedly, like such as accountancy. But
in terms of our diverse economy that we have, what's quite interesting is a very small population and a very diverse economy. We have jobs are a little bit more accessible than you would. You know, if you go to London, you might be interviewed, and there could be 1,000 people there, but you'll be, maybe 6. In which case, your chances of getting great experience, and then maybe that's something we should be selling. The ability to get those jobs is a lot easier, and coupled with selling the lifestyle. And unless, of course, they turn up and we close the borders and they can't escape.
Yeah, I think that it's selling the opportunities from a business point of view, but I think we've got to identify what the young graduate out of university or actually wants, and even our local guys coming out of school, going to college, what do they actually want as a lifestyle to entice them to stay on the Isle of Man? And I think that is very important, and I often think we don't put enough emphasis on that. People want to enjoy after work. The millennial no longer want to work the long hours. They prefer a lifestyle, and we have to identify that the island has to provide that for them.
Yeah, and with the islands picking up on that, the islands' commitment to sort of the climate change report and the push in that direction over the next 10 years, that is something I think a lot of people identify with. And but with COVID, they'll be thinking about lifestyle as well as safety and as well as a nice environment, and that's something we have a good opportunity to offer.
Question coming from Derek here for the panel. We're really in uncharted waters and unprecedented times at the moment on the Isle of Man. If the Isle of Man government should take these bold steps, what should they be? I'm assuming this is going to relate to our discussion a few moments ago as opposed to the graduate side.
I think one interesting thing is that because of this, and because of, for example, the origins of the fund itself, and the speed with which government has worked throughout this period with the private sector, I think the private sector and the public sector should come much closer together with the way that they actually work. And in some respect, I suppose, get to trust each other. So that will enable bold steps to be taken, because governments are naturally going to be reserved and risk averse, and private sector is the opposite side of this. We can come together, we can work together to actually do a great many things.
And one for you, Richard. Do you see the visitor economy returning to full force? What can the tourism industry learn from others to come out of the COVID phase stronger?
Yes, I mean, obviously, border issue aside, which is obviously a massive current issue, if we can manage to sort of reinstate the air routes that we had prior to the pandemic, and that's a big if, then yes, I think it will take years. I don't think it's a short-term thing, but I think it can take years. There were encouraging signs in the tourism industry, and I think to their credit, the visit agency has done a really good job since it's been created. It's got a strategy for the next 3 years. It's got some extra funding from Treasury for marketing. It's got a clear idea of where it wants to be, and it's got some talented people in the team. On the back of that, I think the extraordinary story creative sort of really hit home in a positive sense. So it may be 2 or 3 years, but I think, yes, there's no reason why. I think we do offer something very different. And I think if we can continue to invest in overcoming some of those outdated perceptions of the island, such as boring nothing to do for visitors, then there's no reason why I think, maybe 2 or 3 years' time, all being well, with Air Links, etc., that we can't be where we were last year, which was with visitor numbers, showing increases. But again, a lot of it's down to vision. I think tourism have got that, but I think they need to be supported through continued investment in the product. So we want to be a great walking destination, and we are in a lot of respects. So we have to make sure we invest in our pathways, etc. Make sure that they're fit to walk around. Make sure the walkers have facilities, etc. And make sure that in those markets where we're competing, that our product is up to scratch. One thing I think that still surprises me, that after all this time of having a developed tourism industry, we still haven't had a 5-star hotel on the island. And I actually think one would do really well. So I think we need to look at the reasons why we haven't. Are we being sort of proactive enough in engaging potential investors? But the investors we have attracted have been sort of in the 3-star category, Premier Inn, Travelodge, etc. So I think we need to look at maybe upping the game in terms of the kind of investors in that sector that we can attract.
Do we need to offer more incentives to those sort of people? Is that a way that we could encourage them? Is that a doable thing?
I think there was talk of potential funding for hotels that came out of the hotel study, but that came out a few years ago. I'm not sure where that is. But obviously, coming out of all this, if we can show that we were on an upward trend with visitors, which we can do, if we can show that we're confident in where we're going as a visitor destination, which I think we can do, if I think we can demonstrate that really at the heart of it we have got a good product in a lot of respects, then that gives encouragement to investors. But if we don't go out and sell the island to them, they're not going to know about us and they're not going to come. They're going to invest somewhere else.
I think it actually comes down to that vision. It's a holistic view of what we want the island to be, and then to put the investment in to achieve that, and that will include all the facets of this for tourism. But it involves, it's all going to involve money to do that, and we're going to have to spend some, I think, in order to achieve it.
I think, coming back to Derek's question, what would be bold, and connecting it to what you're saying, we need to secure our air links for the island, and it's a very difficult one, but for businesses and for in tourism to come, we have to be confident that we can get places from the island. And I'm not an aviation expert, and I think that the government has to work closely with the tourism sector to be able to have those secure air links where people can come to the island, can move in and out of the island very freely and regularly, and get those key routes, especially to London, to Manchester, to Liverpool. Those 3 key routes. And I think, we've seen the aviation industry is going through a very difficult time. And, will we only have national carriers in the future? What is going to happen to that, the aviation industry? And we have to do something very quickly and move quickly on that.
I mean, Guernsey will probably have benefited from having an airline. I know it's a loss-making entity, but in the bigger picture, does it actually benefit the economy to a greater degree than that loss? On a kind of related point, I know that I think it's DOI who look after air routes and secure airlines for certain routes. Perhaps as a going forward in terms of linking it to our economic recovery and our long-term vision, maybe there's another entity, perhaps DFE or the agencies combined, who need to be more involved in establishing where we want to fly to, and making sure that's all in place.
With the Isle of Man government having purchased the steam packet company, do we think that could be a route to go then? Should they be looking into?
Well, it was sold as securing the island's lifeline, wasn't it? I mean, air routes are vital. We've seen that, not only from a business perspective, but pre-pandemic, Flybe went bust, and a lot of people's sort of holidays and trips went with it. But I know the pandemic got in the way, but I was never really a fan of government owning an airline. But given the last few months with the fall of Flybe, the pandemic, maybe it's worth looking at on maybe one or two routes.
So coming back to the Manx Solidarity Fund, obviously tourism has struggled over the last couple of months with lockdown. Is that a sort of an area you expect to see more applicants come from the longer this goes on?
To date, there's been a surprisingly low amount of applicants from the actual hospitality or tourism sector. I do think that there will be more on that, from that, yeah.
And just again, coming back to the Manx Solidarity Fund, it's great that the Manx Solidarity Fund got a bank account opened in the Isle of Man in 2 days. What can we do to allow innovative Manx businesses the same opportunities? Difficult question.
Very difficult.
Yeah, difficult. Taking the gift of the banks and their procedures, which are understandable in many respects. They have to follow their procedures.
Yeah.
For very good reasons, as we know. I think in this particular instance, it's clearly a national need.
That, there was a big reason why the account was opened there. Our firm that was running the bank account and doing the administration behind the fund had existing accounts, and it was very easy. So the due diligence was done beforehand. The banks have to follow the proper procedures, and so from that point of view, it's to be innovative is to learn exactly what the banks need and make it easy for them to be able to open your account quickly. It's knowing the system, I think, and to make it easy for the bank to follow their procedures and do their proper due diligence.
As time goes on and as we progress further down sort of the ease of lockdown here and across, is there anything around the fund side of things where you're going to slowly relax sort of the applicants, make it a broader approach, or is it very much see where we end up?
I think at this stage, we will always look at it and always take advice and look at it. We are governed by the trust deed, and up until the time where we can apply to the Attorney General to change that, we will. I think when we went into this, we didn't know what the future would be, so it was purely aimed at the COVID issues. Who knows how we can change that? But we've got to remember that people donated funds to us and entrusted that money for a particular purpose. So it's going to be quite difficult to change it.
And dare I say it, we don't know whether we will get a second wave.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then it will be a repeat in many respects of where we are. Let's hope not. But it's a possibility, in which case the fund will be there for those purposes.
So for most people, and I'm sure they've been working from home throughout this time, and people have started going back to the offices. So if we do see that case or multiple cases come back to the island, what do you think the measures imposed will be? Do you think it'll be a very similar go back to lockdown? What can businesses do to prepare themselves for that as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of businesses, the ones that I'm aware of, have actually adapted very, very quickly to this, and so they can probably, or certain of them can transit. Other businesses, hospitality, are opening up. I mean, it's catastrophic for those sectors, and in many respects, government may be able to move a lot more quickly now. But also very possibly, I'm not sure where we're up to on tracing here, and that because that's going to become fundamental, and one hopes that we get that capability remains, so we can isolate, much like the UK is trying to do at the moment in terms of certain areas, and other countries are doing the same thing. And if we do that, we should close if we have to go into lockdown, one would hope that it's for a very short period only, and isolated.
So businesses have obviously acted fast and reimagined their business models in order to continue to operate during the crisis. How can businesses reinvent themselves, and have you seen any good examples of businesses on the island doing that?
I don't know about reinventing themselves, but I was really impressed with Afundi and their eatout.im website. They actually helped with the Solidarity Fund website. They got the application form up and running in about 3 days, which was fantastic. But the introduction of that website and that functionality has actually enhanced the proposition for many eateries in the Isle of Man. It's a great looking portal. It's really easy to use, and a lot of people, I think it's over £100,000 worth of orders now, have availed themselves of it. And I think they very quickly saw a need in the market, and they worked very quickly to deliver that. So they would be my example of a good news story during the pandemic.
I would like to sort of promote them as well. The way that they got out. One of the difficulties that we had as a fund to be able to get to people quickly was having easy access to an application process. Now, if somebody had to download a form, fill it out, send it by post to us, it would have taken a long time. And the Afundi acted really quickly and made it easy for us. And they also has done the eatout website. So that is an example of two people who adapted quickly to the COVID crisis and have benefited a number of other restaurants and through their quick action.
Do you think there are sort of other opportunities there for people to do something similar? Obviously, that's one example that's very specific to that industry.
But I think we've seen it right through. In the Isle of Man, farmers are delivering milk. They've been, all of us suddenly adapted. We couldn't go to the shops, or we were reluctant to go to the shops. And there were people, taxi drivers adapted themselves and started delivering food. And it was, people have adapted. You just have to get on with it.
Yeah, some of that may remain embedded in their business model because it's probably worked, and then I suppose in some instances you might find that it's actually worked better than their own one. So, or it augments it at the very least.
And do you think this is then an opportunity moving forward for businesses on the Isle of Man to have a more global market, actually having to reinvent themselves in some form for that online presence where they may not have had one? Does that open up further opportunities to the Isle of Man and the business community as a whole?
I think that, personally think that's a much bigger ask to do that, because clearly the global marketplace is, there's an attempt not just to regulate it, but certainly to tax it. And you've got to remain competitive with your product in all of that. So it's a question of whether businesses can be competitive in that global market. And access to the market is a lot easier. So there's a lot of the logistical issues come into that, I think. But it's not impossible, but yeah, I think there's other opportunities.
I think it's telling our story, and you be just get out there and try it. Even our Manx Solidarity Fund has been copied in India. I got approached by India by being on a conference call with somebody from India and told them about the Solidarity Fund, and they've copied our model in Mumbai.
So just to open it up to any more questions that might come through on Slido, we'll go to that in 5 or 6 minutes. But just between the three of you, can you summarise a vision for the Isle of Man moving forward? Can you sort of pull all these ideas together to give us sort of a talking point to go away with?
I'll start. In terms of a vision, we've had visions in the past, and I think they have been a little bit there's been a lack of coherence. That's certainly what I felt. I think this time any vision, and I don't know what it needs to be, but it's going to need A, a lot of thought, but B, it has to be a coherent vision involving tax policy, fiscal policy, the way that we approach the market and our target market. And all of those elements need to be working together to achieve the same aim. And it's not just a 5-year vision, it's a longer vision than that, because to change the direction of the island with the pressures we're under is going to necessitate thinking much, much further ahead in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
Richard?
Yeah, I think we've got to start with a vision, and I'm kind of reluctant to sort of put one forward, because I think we need a root and branch review of where we are now and where are the opportunities, and be honest with ourselves in terms of where we're weak and where we need to improve and where we need to invest. So it's a little bit of a non-committal response, because I think you need to do the groundwork before you can start articulating where you want to be.
Yeah, and I think also they make a very good point there, because actually you've got to understand your shortcomings and recognise those shortcomings. There's a great feeling of saying, well, we can't admit that we're not good at this or whatever. We've got to say we can't track this type of business because of X, Y, and Z. Recognise that and then try and find a solution. But it's the recognition bit that we sometimes overlook.
And Basil?
I think it's really coming to terms of where we are. We're a small island of 85,000 people at the moment. We've got to create a vision of what we want to do. Do we want to grow to 100,000 people, or what does the population want? What we've created here, or what the Isle of Man has created, compared to, we're smaller than most towns in the UK. And we've got an incredible reach, and we've got a credible opportunity to grow in the future. And I think we've got to utilise that vision, but everybody's got to buy into a vision that's created by business and by government working together, and individuals. It's not just business, it's everybody on the Isle of Man. But we've got to identify what that vision is.
Thank you. So we've had a few more questions come through on Slido to have a look at. So isn't it an ideal time to look at other business sectors such as medical tech or similar selling the safety, lifestyle aspects of the Isle of Man rather than tax?
Yes.
I think the safety, lifestyle aspects of the messaging's there already. Whether we do enough of it is another matter. Getting into a new sector, it's a very expensive, labour-intensive exercise, I think, in terms of investigating whether it's something that the Isle of Man should compete in. And then if you decide you do want to compete in it, you've then got to invest a heap more money in actually trying to make an impact in what will probably be a sector where there's global competition. So I'm not saying I'm against it, but I think there needs to be a bit of work, quite a lot of work, in terms of determining whether it's something we actually want to get into. I mean, there's been attempts in the past in terms of things like medical devices and biomed's another sector. There's a certain amount of presence here on the island already, but there's a lot of work and investment that is required to establish whether we have the appropriate regulation and whether we're prepared to commit the appropriate investment in terms of making sure it happens.
Thinking about that, obviously tax has been central to our economy for many, many years, and I'm a tax practitioner, but the reality of the matter is, even if we move into those new sectors, which I think is a great idea, and the focus should shift away from tax, you're still going to be left with, how are you going to trade? Who your trading partners are? Are you going to actually be economically worse off as a result of doing something here or doing something somewhere else? So tax is going to come into it no matter what. I hate to say it, or I should be quite pleased to say that, but it's an inevitability. And of course all the other countries around the world are trying to actually compete against this. So we have to have probably a tax advantage, because we are actually locally a high tax economy, with income tax and VAT and national insurance. We pay a lot of tax. So we've got to be competitive. So we have to think about that.
Yeah. Why has there been so little discussion here of building Manx productivity and reducing red tape today, since that's what's actually caused economic growth?
Well, one factor, and I think Paul could probably add to this, is that if we're more productive, with 0% corporate tax, we're not actually going to generate any additional economic benefit unless we actually employ more people. Totally agree about reducing red tape. Government, for many years, has used it as a sort of a bullet point in terms of a benefit, and committed to reducing bureaucracy. I don't know, something that came out of the Freedom to Flourish sort of branding report was that the government was seen as agile and responsive, and therefore, by implication, was able to reduce red tape. I'm not sure that the reality has always kept up with the messaging, so it's on government to make sure that we do need appropriate regulation, enforceable obviously, but we need to ensure that to encourage business, we need to make sure that red tape is as thin as possible.
Mm-hmm. And one from Derek here. With tourism entertainment making up just 1% of GDP, are we overly focused on it as a catalytic recovery tool?
Well, I think the 1% relates to tourism accommodation, but I think if you look at it in the whole, tourism hospitality is a core component of ensuring that we have a good quality of life here. And in terms of the economics of it, we've got food wholesalers, the two telecom firms benefit from having roamers here. So it's more than just that sort of very narrow definition, which I think is tourism accommodation.
It also puts us on the map. So the TT has 2 million viewers, I think, or followers, and it puts us on the map. We get people who relocate here as a result of that. So that affects all industries. So as I agree with Richard, it's very narrow in terms of the figure there, in terms of what it will do for us.
I think that there needs to be an exercise in terms of determining how much the tourism industry is actually worth to the island, because I don't think the national income stats do it justice, and that's always been the problem. I think people have looked at the stats, the economic data, and thought, well, it's only a very small part of our economy. But in fact, its reach extends through broad swathes of our economy. I mean, it's particularly important for our domestic economy because a lot of businesses in this sector, the profits are retained on Ireland.
So I think that brings us to a close for this part of the event today. Damien is going to join us from the Manx Industrial Relations Service. But for now, thank you very much for your time today. It's been really informative, and I think everyone who's been watching and listening would agree. It's been very entertaining at some points, and hopefully they've enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Can I just say one thing? If anybody does know of people who are struggling, please contact anybody in the Manx Solidarity Fund. We've got a website at manxsolidarity.com. If they could contact us, and there's an application form, and hopefully we can help them.
manxsolidarityfund.com.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that moves us on to the second part of today, which is a Q&A with Damien from the Manx Industrial Relations Service. It's again open on Slido, so if anyone has any questions they would like to send through, we'll get those answered for you today. But first of all, I'm going to pass you over to Damien to give a bit of an introduction on himself and what he does and how long he's been with the service.
Okay, thanks very much, Tom. Good evening, and good evening to everybody who's watching and listening. I'm Damien Warburton. I'm a Deputy Industrial Relations Officer with the Manx Industrial Relations Service. I'm comparatively new to MERS. I'm not new to industrial relations because prior to Joining MERS, I was with their equivalent in the UK, which is ACAS, an organisation I worked with for about 25 years. So I've been around the block for a bit, although I'm still comparatively new to the Isle of Man, having joined MERS back in November of last year.
Perfect. So how can employees protect themselves if they feel they're at risk of redundancy if a second wave of COVID hits the Isle of Man and the Isle of Man locks down again?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess there's a limited amount that they can do. A decision on redundancy is always something that is within the gift of the employer rather than the employee. So it'll be the business that decides that they need to make redundancies. I guess from the point of view of an employee, if I wanted to protect myself, if I felt my business might be in a position to make redundancies, I would want to make sure that I was one of the people that they couldn't afford to lose. And so I would be working diligently on their behalf. I might be inclined to be a little bit more flexible at the moment, maybe more flexible than I might have been inclined to be 6 months ago. So that if they are in the unfortunate position of saying, who can we let go and who do we need to keep? I'm one of those people on the list that they don't feel they can do without.
Thank you. And during an extended period of working from home, over 80% of the workforce expressed an interest in working from home in the longer term. How can we address that and the balance of staff needs and wants against the associated costs to the employer of setting up working from home and the office?
Okay, well, I mean, I think that there's a word in that question which is really important in the answer as well, which is balance. Employers routinely had people on their premises pre-COVID, and that's what the contract said, and that is the way that people on a sort of a standard basis tended to work. Most businesses have been forced into allowing or enabling people to work from home while the island has had the problem with COVID. And a lot of businesses are now trying to sort of go back to the way it was pre-COVID. A lot of employees, for their part, some of them will have enjoyed working from home, others won't. So some will be very glad to get back to the office, but others will have decided, actually, why do I want that daily commute? Why do I want the expense of going into the office? So I think this is all about having a discussion between employer and employee. If the employer needs people to come back into the office, then they need to explain carefully why that is the case and why it might not be effective or efficient to have them working from home. If staff have been asked to come back, but they don't want to come back, they would prefer to work at home, I think they need to explain to their employer how they feel more productive, the benefits to the business of allowing them to work from home. And in terms of the cost, I guess that there will to some extent be a trade-off. Yes, it might cost me as an individual more to work from home, but equally, if I was a regular commuter, I would save the cost of my commute. So the one might offset the other. So I might not ask my business to subsidise me working from home. I might just accept that it's sort of broadly cost neutral. Equally, from a business point of view, and I fully accept that this will depend on things like lease breaks and what have you. If you quoted a figure of 80%, let's say they could agree that 60% of their staff work from home, they simply don't need the office space that they've got at the moment. So there's a big saving potentially to the business as and when they can afford to downsize. So I think it's about developing a dialogue between the employer and the employee to try and get a solution that works for everybody.
Thank you. This one's been asked more than once, actually, as a pressing issue for individuals. I have not had a need to take my annual leave entitlement this year with no travel plans until the end of the year. What should I do about the balance of my annual leave?
Okay, well, again, there's going to be a recurring theme here. This is about dialogue between employer and employee. Good practice says that individuals should take their annual leave during the leave year in which it accrues. Okay, now that may well not be possible at the moment because of COVID, and I think everybody understands that. So again, if the individual wants to take leave, then they should apply to take it, and subject to business needs, employers should let people take leave. If employers are concerned about the build-up of leave and the possibility of it sort of either being lost or being taken next year, then an employer, if it wants to, can request that individuals take leave. And if they don't do it when they're asked nicely, employers can compel individuals to take leave. So, wherever the request or the driver to take leave is coming from, whether it's to take it now or to postpone it, again, there needs to be a dialogue between employer and employee. recently that the government has changed the law to allow annual leave to be carried from one leave year to another. So there is a facility to do it, but there isn't a requirement for employers to do it. So they can choose whether or not they agree to that request.
So that actually probably answers the next question in part at least. So as an employer, if staff carry over annual leave to 2021, I'm going to struggle to keep the business serviced. How do I ensure staff still receive the full benefits without compromising the business operations and customer service levels?
Okay, well, I suppose you could either make them take it this year, and I'll come back on to giving notice about how you can do that. So you can either make them take it this year, you could agree that they carry it over into next year, and in fact, they can carry it over for the next 2 years, so you could let them take maybe half of it next year and half of it the year after, so it might not be quite such a big problem. As an employee, you can direct when people take leave. So the answer might be, yes, I'll let you carry your leave over, but you'll have to take 2 weeks of it in June, for example. That's a condition for me agreeing to carry it over. If employers want to specify when people take leave, they can do that, but they will need to give them twice as much notice compared to the amount of leave they want them to take. So if I wanted you, a member of my staff, to take a week's leave, I'd have to give you at least 2 weeks' notice before I'd be in a position to legally force you to take that leave.
Perfect. And one more on here. As an employer, we've had to furlough staff during COVID. Coming back to this new normal, can we continue operating operations as it's for 2 to 3 months? Then cash flow will likely dry up and we'll have to review employment terms. Okay. What are my options in terms of redundancy, reduced hours and reduced pay for my staff?
Okay, so we're back to the recurring theme of dialogue and agreement. Employers can change terms and conditions, and there are 3 ways of doing this. There is advice and guidance on our website. If people want to click on the website and click on the latest news icon, there was an article posted, I think it was the 17th of March, which sets out in a bit of detail how you can bring about change. But essentially, there are 3 ways. The best way and the only trouble-free way is to do it by agreement. So the employer suggests what it is that they want to do. They have a dialogue with the staff and the staff agree to it. So that's the golden scenario. If they try that and the staff won't agree or won't agree to all of the changes that they want, then the employer can give notice to change terms and conditions. So typically they should give the notice either under the contract or under statute, which will be 1 week for each completed year of service. So I might say to you, you've been with me for 4 years. I've tried to change your terms by agreement and you won't accept it. So I'm now giving you notice. In 4 weeks, I'm going to change certain terms of your contract. Okay, so I can do that. There are problems with doing that. And it is possible for you as a member of staff to resist those changes. So I suppose it's the nuclear option for employers. Rather than give notice to amend the contract, I'm going to give you notice to end it in its entirety. And then I'm going to replace it with a new one that looks very much like the old one, but it's got the changes that I wanted incorporated into it. And you don't get to pick and choose which terms you like. You either accept the new contract or you don't. It's a high-risk strategy for employers because they are ending contracts. They're dismissing staff. So, the bottom line is do it by agreement. If you can't do it by agreement, you can force it through, but both of those choices, the ways to do it, are quite problematic.
And for employees finding themselves in that position, is there any advice to them? Or what can they do? What's the most potentially proactive way of addressing it?
Yeah, again, I think this is about explaining to your employer why you will have difficulty accommodating those changes. I mean, it might be something that the vast majority of staff can agree to, but everyone's circumstances are different. So it might be that all of my other colleagues can agree to the change, but I can't. And it might be because I've got, particular childcare needs, for example. So it would be about me explaining to my employer how I need to be different and trying to get their understanding and agreement to it. And there are lots of myths about employment law, one of which is you've got to treat everybody exactly the same. That just isn't the case. If the proposed changes work for everyone other than me, let them have the changes and let me be different. But have the good reason for it. If people challenge, well, why is Damien not required to do certain things? You will have to have some good reasons in order to explain why I'm being treated differently.
And have you found over the last month, 2 months, 3 months since COVID-19 started and furloughing, that you've had an increase in members contacting you for advice on these matters?
We have had absolutely masses of enquiries from both employers and employees. The nature of the enquiries has changed as the sort of COVID crisis unfolded. But in recent weeks, a lot of the enquiries have been about either how do I make people redundant, because sadly that employers are not in a position to keep people on, or they have been about return to work. And sometimes it's been employers frustrated at people's either fear or lack of willingness, as they see it, to come back into work. And sometimes it's employees saying, I'm feeling sort of pressurized or unduly forced, if you like, to come back to work when I'm not, comfortable to do that.
And what is that? So the common trend really has been around the returning to work side of things over time.
It's very much been about people wanting flexible ways of working. And I think the vast majority of people have been perfectly reasonable about this. I think employers are open to different ways of working, but not all employers. Some employers are defaulting back to, well, look, it's 100% attendance in the office 100% of the time. And the reason for that is purely because that's how we've always done it. They haven't necessarily got a sound business reason for continuing in that way when their staff are asking for something different. Equally, there's always two sides to a story. There are employees who are being asked to work flexibly now who are also then saying, well, that isn't how we did it before. I don't see why I should do that now.
Perfect. So that's all the questions that we've had through for you today. For anyone that would like more information, where do they need to go to find you?
They can look online. So our website is www.mirs.org.im. So there's a fair amount of information online there. We have produced various guides specifically related to the issues that have come around as a result of COVID. But there's other useful stuff on there just on general disciplinary and grievance and equality type stuff as well. We have a Facebook presence, so we will often post updates on Facebook, and we're contactable by phone as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much.
If you want a face-to-face meeting, they can always pop along, and one of my colleagues will speak to you.
Excellent. Thanks very much for joining us tonight, Damien. You've answered quite a lot of questions, I think, there. And if we have any further ones come through, we'll direct them to yourself and look for answers, if you're happy to do so.
That's absolutely fine. That wouldn't be a problem at all.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And that just leaves me to close tonight's event and say thank you all for tuning in and listening to us discuss all the topics. Follow us on Facebook, or you can find us on our website, Isle of Man Business Network, for more information. So thank you very much.
Okay.
It's so simple, just to
Yeah, what they do is they pick up, it's a high-pitched squeal. But it's funny because when we sound checked earlier, all the mics were on, no squeal, everything's perfect. The minute we went live, it's like you all had a computer on your laps and there was an iPad, and I was like, where's that coming from? And it's something that's been injected. So it's better to find it now.
No,
You getting anything there now? So put all 4 belt pads. Bring the other belt. Yeah. Is it? Here, Luke. Valid point. That's good. That's good. At least we found it. Do you know what? That's great.
You go and listen.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. And
Take it away. Yeah.
and now can you hear me? 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 And now,
Yes, sir.
yeah. It's RF.
That's interesting. That.
Yeah.
That's like an Apple power supply.
Yes.
Apple Mac power supplies are the noisiest power supplies you can get. They ban them in studios in the UK. They're not allowed to use them. So that's really interesting. I've never seen a Surface Pro. Yeah. It's good. Do you know what? It's just an interesting point because I would never have thought that a Surface Pro or something like that would create that much noise. That's interesting.
It'd be interesting to see whether it's the Wi-Fi on it.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, whether it's Wi-Fi or something else.
Yeah, and we should test
Is it 4G enabled? Has it got a SIM card in that
This
one?
one hasn't got SIM card in.
No, so it's got to be either.
We should test it with mobile network. We should test it with a
Yeah,
laptop.
well, we'll go wired. We'll do wired, and then it doesn't matter what they've got on their leg because we're talking.